The Adventures of Superman. Superman on Earth. Krypton, July 1981. Come with us now to a planet named Krypton, which shines like an emerald orbiting a giant K-type star that's on its last legs of life. On this planet live a group of people known as the Kryptonians. The Kryptonians are just like humans. If they stood side by side to a human, there's nothing to differentiate them apart. But genetically, they are superior than humans. Over the centuries, the Kryptonians had freely genetically modified themselves to become as physically fit as possible. They virtually eradicated disease. They pretty much control death, even though they can still die from natural causes, but they have a longer lifespan than, say, the average human. And compared to humans, they're far, far more technologically advanced than humans are. They have long since explored the stars, explored the many avenues of science and technology, and even made excursions into other galaxies. But this race is about to end soon. We come to the city of Kryptonopolis, where a sky car leaves the bustling alien metropolis to its home. The sky car heads for a lone palace-like spire out in the vast foreboding wasteland. It lands in the landing bay, and soon a tall young man who looks like he's in his early 20s exits the car. After he exits the sky car, a floating little robot comes in and says to him,
"Your Majesty, you're back very soon from your meeting with the High Council."
The man says, "Yes, I am, Keelix. Yes, I am. Begin with our plan. Execute phase 1 of evacuation, Kal-El." Keelix says,
"Yes, Your Majesty, right away."
As the little robot floats off at high speed, the man shouts at Keelix, and Keelix, send the coded message to Greg Orr. Then Keelix says from the distance,
"Yes, Your Majesty, I will."
The man who was giving the orders to the floating robot was none other than Jor-El. Jor-El was the 23-year-old king of Krypton. Even though Krypton's kings have long since had less and less powers, and the High Council has been the one to really run the show, nonetheless, the king was still head of the planet, head of its territories, and head of the High Council. And like most Kryptonians, he was a very talented scientist, and he had been discovering some very alarming data that their sun, named Rao, could go supernova at any time. It could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be 100 years from now, but it's ready to go boom. But the High Council didn't want to hear it. They wanted to go with the data from rival scientist Rogan, which says that the star had at least 1 million more years of life before it went supernova, and there was no need to worry about anything. But Jor-El knew that the High Council was not going to go with his findings, so he decided to make a backup plan. He told this information to several members of the Kryptonian nobility class. Several of them listened. One of them was Greg Orr, his longtime best friend. And the other person, of course, was his trusted wife. Well, Jor-El finally arrives to his laboratory. There, his wife was down there looking at a giant holographic image of farmers on Earth working. As Jor-El approaches her, Laura says, "Oh dear God, Jor-El, look at those barbarians with their shirts off working out in that field. Oh, how can you fathom the idea of sending our unborn child to that planet?" Jor-El says, "I have no choice. It is the only planet where he could blend in, except for the yellow sun would give him great powers. That's the only problem." Laura says, "Are you sure there's no other planets where he could have a chance to survive in?" Jor-El says, "No, Laura, I'm afraid not." Soon Keelix comes floating in, and he says to Jor-El,
Your Majesty, the gestation matrix has been loaded onto the rocket. The rocket's fuel is awaiting your data input for the coordinates, and the message has been sent to Gregor, and he's beginning the evacuation already.
Jor-El says, "Excellent, Kelex. You're no longer needed for now. You can head off to charge." The robot nodded yes and floated off at high speed. Jor-El walks over to his workbench and picks up a bizarre-looking device. It looks like a very elaborate paperweight with Kryptonian writing on it. He grabs it, walks over to the rocket pod, and inserts it inside a little niche. He looks at the blue gestational matrix that was loaded onto the rocket pod. It looked like a giant blue egg on top of a golden rocket pod. Jor-El looks at the egg. He puts his hand on it and he says, "Soon, my son, you'll find safety in a new home." Then Jor-El walks over to his fancy control interface where everything was holographic, and he begins inputting the coordinates to Earth. After Jor-El was done inputting the coordinates to Earth, him and Laura were suddenly frightened by a massive earthquake that happened. As quick as it started, the earthquake was over, but the palace tower was badly damaged as pieces of debris were falling from the ceilings. Laura screams in terror, "Jor-El, what's going on?" Jor-El says to her, "It's too late. It's happening. I think the star's collapse is imminent." Jor-El quickly runs over to the interface and hits the launch sequence. Soon the pod's engines light up and it begins taking off. Soon the rocket pod carrying the embryo of the unborn Kal-El makes its way into hyperspace and takes the embryo on its 9-month journey to Earth. Shortly after it made the jump to light speed, Krypton's star, Rao, begins its death as it collapses and explodes with a mighty supernova, destroying Krypton into pieces in the process, destroying the once great civilization, now just but a memory. Nine months later, the little rocket pod that carried the developing fetus was finally making its approach to Earth. 9 months later, it was April 13th, 1982. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in Smallville, Kansas, as married couple Jonathan and Martha Kent, both of them in their early 30s, were on their way home to the farm after having breakfast at a diner. Jonathan had to get started on his chores for the day around the farm, and Martha was going to be doing her housewife routines around the house while he would be working out in the field. As Jonathan's old silver Dodge pickup truck was making its way to the property, Martha says, "Jonathan, do you hear that noise?" Jonathan says, "Yes, I hear that noise. What is it?" Martha says, "I don't know." Jonathan says, "Maybe some airplane or something." Jonathan pulls the truck over onto the grass. Then him and Martha get out. They look around to see what was that noise. Then they look to the sky. Then both of them saw it. Shooting through the clouds, it was a giant fireball headed their way. Jonathan and Martha quickly ran. It looked like this fireball was headed right for the truck. As they ran, the fireball crashed right into the field. Jonathan and Martha dust themselves off from all the dirt that rained on them from the impact. They see out in the field a ditch and a crater where the pod landed. They ran through the destroyed barbed wire fence and arrived to the rocket pod. There, it was cooling down from the impact. There was little fires here and there that were quickly extinguishing. Then they saw the rocket pod in its full detail. Martha asked Jonathan, "Jonathan, what is that?" Jonathan says, "I think it could be a satellite, but it doesn't look like any satellite that I see in the popular science magazines. I don't know if this is even human." Martha says, "Nonsense, Jonathan. It has to be man-made." Suddenly, they saw the blue egg on top starting to dissolve and open up. There, they saw a baby inside. Martha freaks out and she says, "Land of Goshen. Those godless communists. This is what it is. It's Russian. Those godless communists are sending babies up into space. My God." Jonathan again says to Martha, "Martha, this does not look anything like the commies would make. I think this is an actual alien ship." Martha says, "It can't be. Look at that baby. It's human." Jonathan says to Martha again, "I don't think so. Look, this baby has its umbilical cord. Look at all the goo on it. This is like a newborn baby." Martha says to Jonathan, "You're right. This is a newborn baby." Jonathan tells Martha, "Martha, go to the truck, get my towel, and get the shear." Martha runs off to the truck and gets the stuff that Jonathan asked. When she comes back, Jonathan cuts the cord with the shears and wipes the baby down and wraps it up tightly. He gives it to Martha. Martha cuddles the baby. She says, "Jonathan, we must keep him." Jonathan's like, "I don't know, Martha. We don't know where this thing came from. We don't know if his parents are going to come looking for him. We don't even know if the government picked this thing up and might be coming to snoop around here." Martha says, "Jonathan, we have to keep him. We'll just say that we adopted him from the orphanage. I'll name him... What should I name him?" Jonathan's like, "I don't know. What do we name him?" Martha's like, "Oh, I know. I'll give him my maiden name, Clark. Clark Kent." Jonathan, knowing it was useless, Martha already grew very attached to the baby. Within seconds said, "Fine, we'll keep him. I'll get this pod later on tonight when it's dark and the thing's fully cooled down." And the years pass by. Spring turns to summer, summer turns to autumn, autumn turns to winter. As the years go by, the little baby they found started to grow up, and by the time he reached 10 years old, he was starting to manifest certain powers and abilities. Now we go to the year 1994. Clark is 12 years old and he's come home from school. His mom screams, "Clark, is that you?" Clark says, "Yeah, Mom, it's me." Clark comes up to his mom and he explained to his mom what happened. He says, "Mom, today I was in PE. We were playing baseball. Well, we lost baseball, of course, so when I went to find it, I found it. But it was the way that I found it," he says to his mother. Then he goes on to explain, "Mom, it was behind a rock, but the thing is, I saw through that rock like an X-ray. Then when I looked around, I started to see everybody's bones. I freaked out a little bit, but I was able to maintain my cool, and I eventually gained control of my powers, and now I see normally again." "Mom, what's going on with me?" asked Clark. Martha was like, "Okay, it's time to have that talk. Not the birds and the bees. I'm talking about the other talk," she says. Soon Jonathan comes in the door. She calls Jonathan to the kitchen. They explain to Clark his alien origin, and Jonathan takes Clark to the barn. There in the basement of the barn, he shows Clark the rocket pod that brought him to Earth. And Clark looked around. He looked at the pod and he found the object that Jor-El put in the niche 13 years earlier. He pulls the object out of the niche and he sees the strange Kryptonian writings on it. As Clark examines it, he felt a weird sensation. He freaked out and he tossed that thing on the workbench in the basement. Jonathan asks, "What's going on, Clark?" Clark says, "I don't know, Dad. I just touched that thing. I pulled it out of the pod and it gave me a weird feeling like it was scanning me or something." Clark picks up the object again. He felt the weird feeling again, like he was being scanned. Then it stopped. He puts that down and he asks Jonathan, "Dad, where am I from?" Jonathan says, "We don't know, son. We just found you. You were actually born from that thing, like it was your mother or something. Clark found it a bit freaky, but eventually he would come to terms that he was not human. The years passed again. Now we come to the year 2000, April 13th. Clark was turning 18 years old and his parents were having a big party for him. All his friends were invited from school and some of the neighbors were invited. Throughout the party, Clark was hanging out with his girlfriend, Lana Lang. She was the high school cheerleader and they knew each other since kindergarten. They began dating when they were freshmen in high school and the relationship had grown strong. During the party, Clark and Lana slipped out without anyone noticing outside and they began to make out passionately. Lana in her mind had one thing in mind, to marry Clark Kent. Most everybody in Smallville married their high school sweetheart, but Clark loved Lana, but he had other plans. He was going to go to college soon to become a reporter. Plus, there was his alien background. As much as he wanted to tell Lana, he couldn't. He was always scared what she would do if she found out he was not really human. While Clark and Lana were making out passionately, Clark stopped kissing Lana as he heard a noise. He quickly realized that he was the only one hearing that noise. Lana didn't hear anything. It was in his head, like it was telepathic, like something was calling him. Lana, freaking out, says, Clark, are you okay? Clark says, I'm okay. Then the noise stopped in his head. I'm okay, he says to Lana for the final time. I gotta go. Lana's like, Clark, where are you going? Clark says to Lana, I just don't feel well. I just have a sudden headache that came on. Maybe I ate too much sugar or something. Then the noise came back again in Clark's head. Clark turns around to Lana and says, Lana, just go back inside. I just gotta be alone out here. Maybe the fresh country here will do me some good. Lana says, okay, but if you need anything, Clark, please just come inside and tell me. Or tell your parents, please. Clark says, okay, baby. If I need you, I'll call you. Clark figured where the noise or the telepathic call was coming from. It had to be from the ship. He goes over to the barn, goes down into the barn cellar, and there he sees the object that he pulled out from the ship when he was 12 years old that was still on the workbench there. It was glowing. Clark picks it up, and as he picked it up, he felt another weird sensation, like it was putting some sort of order, a command in his head, and he says, Ellesmere Island. Why? Why Ellesmere Island? Clark walks over with the glowing object to the rocket pod. Suddenly, as he got close to the rocket pod, a bizarre flash of light happened and Clark was teleported. Now Clark was somewhere up north. He was in frozen tundra. There was nothing but snow and mountains around him. He was freaking out. He was literally not in Kansas anymore. The object must have teleported him through the ship to this location. It was still glowing. Then Clark was feeling something like it was giving him another command telepathically to cast it, to throw it. And Clark throws the object. It goes far, and it lands into the snow. As it lands in the snow, it sinks into the snow, and a violent rumble happens like an earthquake, and the ground around collapses, and soon it starts making structures, some sort of structure via nano-assembly technology, something that the Kryptonians mastered thousands of years ago. It was converting the water molecules and the rocks into other objects, metal, circuitry, everything. It was making some sort of building, as literally the spires of the building were rising from the crater. As it rose up, it was a big golden building, something that Clark has never seen before, something not of this world. Clark walks over to the building. There was a door there. He puts his hand on the door. Where he put his hand at began glowing, and the door opens. It was some sort of elevator. He goes in, the door closes, and the elevator takes him down below, deep underground. Soon the elevator ride was over. It was a very quick elevator. The door opens, and Clark was in some sort of chamber. The architecture was nothing that he's seen before. This was completely alien. He walks around until he finds a room. There was a room there with two stone statues of a man and a woman. The woman had a really weird ornate crown on, and both of them were holding a planet up. This must have been his home planet that they're holding up. Who are these people that were holding up the globe of his home planet? Were they important? Could they have been his parents, he wonders? Clark makes it over to an area in that room. There was a bizarre looking control panel there. It had what looked like a place where you insert your hands at. Clark then reaches out with his left arm and he puts his left hand onto the alien control panel. It began scanning his hands, and he felt like it was beginning to scan his brain, like it was extracting information and putting information in his brain. It was a painful process to Clark. The process stopped. Clark took his hand out. Then he saw several robots, little robots, fly into the room, a whole group of them. They were talking amongst each other, like assigning each other tasks and then flying off. Clark was surprised by the whole thing as the robots just communicated with each other and flew off and started doing all their tasks efficiently around this bizarre place. Finally, one flew right over to him. The floating robot identified himself.
Good evening, Prince Kal-El. I am Kelex. I was the servitor to your father on Krypton, and now shall be servitor to you on Earth in this Fortress of Solitude. Right there to your right is a series of memory pendants. You grab one and put it in the receptacle. The one on the far right will contain the essence of your father. He's ready to explain everything to you. If you further need my assistance, you just call my name and I shall come to you, your majesty.
Clark says, confused, "Thank you." He goes over back to the control panel and he looks to his right and he sees a floating panel. Most of the panels here were floating except for the hand scanner thing that was grounded. Clark picks up the diamond-shaped pendants that were there. They all had bizarre markings on them. He grabbed the one that Kelex told him to grab and he put it in the diamond-shaped receptacle in the center of that hand-scanning device that scanned his brain. He puts it in and suddenly there was a bright flash of light and a weird noise. He sees an image forming. It was a holographic image, just like in the movies, but this hologram moved around. It had bizarre clothing he's never seen before, and it was a man he's never seen before. The hologram identified himself. He says, "My son, I am Jor-El, your father. By now, I have been dead for 19 of your Earth years." And he goes on to explain everything to Clark, who his real name is, Kal-El, and the whole history of Krypton and everything. Soon Clark learned everything, his origin, who his real parents are, his lineage. This was the greatest birthday present he's ever received. Later he is teleported back to the barn basement. He comes running out. It was already daylight. He runs into the house and says, "Mom, Dad." His parents quickly run down the stairs and says, "My God, Clark, where were you at? You just disappeared from your party last night. We had to tell all the guests that you felt ill and went to your bedroom." Clark says, "Mom, Dad, I know who I am. I know who I am," with excitement, he says, and he went to explain everything that happened to him. Then the years rolled on by again. Clark has graduated high school, then he went to college, graduating in 3 years with a degree in journalism, and he was just freelancing all over the place as a journalist. Now we go to the year 2006. Clark is 24 years old. Andy returns to Smallville. He comes back home and he announces to his parents that he applied for the Daily Planet, a big metropolitan newspaper located in Metropolis, Florida, a big city in northeast Florida. It was the perfect place where he could settle down at, in his mind. And he was also ready to tell his parents his other big decision, something he's been thinking about since he graduated college in '03, something that even his own Kryptonian father suggested he do in the fortress. To use his power for good, to help the people of Earth, to fight evil. Well, he told his decision to his parents. His parents looked at him, they thought long and hard, and they said, "Okay, son, if you want to do this," said his father, "we agree with you 100%. Then his mother says, "But Clark, you have to be professional about this. You as Clark Kent cannot be fighting crime and saving the world. You need an alter ego, a symbol, somebody who can be seen as uncorruptible, that stands up for truth, justice, and liberty. Somebody that the people can look up to, the world could look up to." Clark says to his mother, "I have it all planned out already, Mom, but I'm going to need your help with the costume. Let's go shopping." Later, they returned home from the cloth store. Clark had bought some blue spandex and a red polyester cloth. Soon they began working on the costume as Martha began taking measurements of Clark and cutting the cloth with her shearing scissors. After she was done with that, then it was straight to the sewing machine to sew the costume together. Clark had come back from the store. He went back to the cloth store to buy some more cloth. He came back with some yellow spandex cloth, and he shows his mom what he designed for the front of the suit. It was a big, weird-looking S on a yellow background shaped like the diamond that patterns that he sees in the Fortress of Solitude memory pendants. And he says, "Mom, you think you can do it? Front and back?" And he showed her the back part. It was just solid yellow for the back of the cape. She says, "Okay, son, I could do it." As she was sewing on the S symbol onto the front part of the suit, his dad comes back home and he says to Clark, "Clark, look what I got you." It was a pair of soft red leather boots made of the same material as glove leather. And his dad says, "Son, this will go great with your new costume." Clark looked at it and was like, "My God, Dad, it's beautiful. I like it." He tries it on. It fits perfectly, just like a glove, he said jokingly, since they were made of the same leather material that they make gloves out of. After his mom was done sewing the new S symbols on the suit and on the cape, Clark tries on his new suit. It was blue spandex with a red spandex brief sewn onto the blue spandex and a yellow belt that would tie around the waist with an oval belt buckle, a long red polyester cape, the red boots that his dad gave him, then the red S on a yellow diamond-shaped background, and matching one on the back of the cape, but completely in yellow. He looked at himself and he says, "Mom, Dad, this is perfect." Jonathan asked Clark, "So Clark, what are you going to do about a secret identity?" Clark quickly brushed his hair differently and put on a pair of fake glasses, and he says, "Voila, the new look for Clark Kent." 1 week later, Metropolis, Florida. Clark was walking down the busy city streets of Metropolis looking for the Daily Planet building. Soon Clark enters the lobby of the Daily Planet building, and it was a pretty busy lobby. He finds the elevator, and he finds the legend to tell him which floor is the main offices of the Daily Planet at. Clark sees where it says Daily Planet Editor-in-Chief Office and Newsroom, 26th floor. So he presses the elevator and takes the elevator up. And within moments, the elevator opens up to the 26th floor and Clark walks out. As he was getting off the elevator, he runs into a woman, but of course, Clark, being different and strong, the woman fell down on the ground. Clark said, "Oh my goodness, I'm sorry, lady, I'm sorry." He quickly helps her up and gets her purse and paperwork, and he says to her, "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am." He then quickly noticed that she was a beautiful woman with black hair and deep blue eyes, and she screams at Clark and she says, "Be careful next time, dude. You know, when you see me walking, get out of my way." She was really angry and really snippy. Clark's like, "I'm terribly sorry." She quickly gets on the elevator and rides it down. Clark's like, Wonder who she is. So Clark goes up to the desk that was in front of the big double doors that led into the newsroom, and he says to the secretary there, "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm here to see Perry White. I have a 1 o'clock appointment for a job interview." The lady looks at the scheduling ledger and she sees that he was on there for the 1 o'clock job interview, and she says, yes, Mr. Kent, just have a seat right there and Mr. White will get to you as soon as he's available. Well, Clark waited hours and hours and hours. It was almost 3 o'clock. She calls Mr. White to see if he remembered about the appointment. Mr. White says over the phone to send him in. She says, "Yes, sir, I'm sending him in right now." She hangs up the phone and says, "All right, Mr. Kent, just walk through these double doors. Perry White's office is at the very end of the newsroom." Clark says, "Thank you." He gets his briefcase, gets up, and walks through the double doors. The newsroom was huge, and it was super busy. Clark was walking through the midst of the busy newsroom on his way to Mr. White's office. Before he made it to the door, he was suddenly bumped into by another employee there. The kid said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, sir." Clark says to the kid, "It's okay, man, it's okay." The kid noticed that Clark was not an employee there, and he asked Clark, "Who are you?" Clark identified himself. "My name's Clark Kent. I'm going to see your boss about the job opening here." The kid said, "Oh, cool. My name is Jimmy Olsen. I'm the photographer here at the Daily Planet, man. Good luck. I hope you get the job." Clark says, "Thanks." So Clark goes up to the offices of Perry White. He knocks on the door. Perry White screams, "Come in!" Clark opens the door, walks into the offices of Mr. White. Mr. White says, "Have a seat, young man." Clark sits down, and Mr. White introduces himself as Perry White, and the two of them get with the job interview. Clark shows him all the paperwork, his resume, all his portfolio of all his work of other newspapers. Mr. White read through them. It was a very long interview process. Meanwhile, over the skies of Metropolis, a new space shuttle was flying. It was an experimental space shuttle called the Lexstar 1. It was LexCorp's prototype space shuttle. LexCorp was hoping to be the company that gets the license to replace the space shuttle with the new Lexstar space shuttle. It is a reusable aircraft, plus it does not need rocket boosters to get up to orbit. It has the ability to do that on its own thanks to the columbite-coated engine, which allows it to use much more powerful fuels that could burn hotter, reducing time to get up into space and making the shuttle much more faster than the current space shuttles that NASA has. Well, they were doing the test flight. In the cockpit was Major Tomlinson, Captain Bainbridge, and Captain Traynor. They were the three men handling the new Lexstar space shuttle, and the lucky reporter who was chosen to go along for the ride was none other than Lois Lane. They had just concluded doing a hypersonic test flight from Metropolis to Panama City and back, which took only 3 minutes. She was surprised at the power of this new experimental shuttle. Tomlinson was explaining to Lois what this thing could do and how it was future-proof, so when new upgrades came along, it could be easily upgraded, and if need be, it could be easily upgraded to do deep space mission in the future when mankind goes further out into space. All this impressed Lois, and then Tomlinson went on to explain that the computer system in here is an experimental operating system that Microsoft has begun developing and allowed LexCorp to use on the new Lexstar shuttle. Well, after he said that, suddenly there was a malfunction on the computer system. Lois asked Major Tomlinson, "Is that normal, Major?" Tomlinson says, "Oh, god damn it, no. The computer crashed." After the display screens quit going into garbled colors, suddenly an orange font was on the screen that said "Good morning," and a male voice kept saying "Good morning" over and over again.
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Afterwards, everybody felt that the main engines kicked on again in full power, and they shot up 40,000 feet in the air on a rocket ride to terror. Soon, the experimental shuttle went back downwards again. This time, the engine went on medium burn, but no matter what Major Tomlinson and all the other men in there were trying to do, the controls were not responsive. They were crashing right into the heart of the city. Tomlinson gets on the radio and says, "Mayday, Mayday, we have a severe computer malfunction. None of the controls are responding. We're heading right into a crash course for the city." Meanwhile, back at the Daily Planet office in Perry White's office, the job interview wasn't going so well for Clark. White looks over his portfolio and all his samples, and he says to Clark, "Well, Mr. Kent, you're a good reporter. You got a good writing style and everything, and I like the way you structure your sentences. But we're looking for someone with more newspaper experience," says Perry White. He continues, "I have nothing against freelancers. It's just we're looking for somebody who's worked at a newspaper for a while, someone who knows the ins and outs of working at a local paper." Clark says, "I understand, Mr. White. Thank you for your time." All of a sudden, Jimmy also comes flying into Mr. White's office, and he's like, "Chief, Chief!" Perry White says, "God damn it, Jimmy. Don't call me Chief, and what have I told you about flying in my office like that?" Jimmy's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. White, but there's an emergency going on right now. That experimental space plane from LexCorp is gone out of control. It's headed right for the city. It's going to crash in right in the heart of the downtown metropolis. They've tried in vain to get the plane under control, but they only were able to slow down the main engines. They can't move it or nothing. It's headed right for the heart of the city." Perry White gets up from his desk and he says, "Great Caesar's ghost! Oh my God, and Lois is on board." Clark decided to use this opportunity to see if he could nail the story and reveal his new alter ego to the public. And he says, "Excuse me, Mr. White, what if I can get a first exclusive with this whole catastrophe that's about to happen?" Mr. White and Jimmy looked at him strangely, and Perry says, "Well, kid, if you can do it, you definitely have a job. But I don't know how you're going to get to the heart of the downtown area. That whole place has probably been sealed off." Clark says, "I think I can do it. I have my ways." Clark gets up and he says, "I'll see you all later," and he runs out the office. And he runs out the newsroom and he gets into the hallway. He looks for any place to change. He sees a janitor's closet down the hall, and he runs into the janitor's closet. He looks. The window was openable in the janitor's closet. Clark pulls the window open. He gets on the ledge of the window and he jumps off. He goes nose first, puts his hands together, and all of a sudden he's morphed into his Superman costume and flies off to save the space plane that's heading for the heart of the city. Meanwhile, at the control tower of the Metropolis International Airport, they were keeping a close eye on the whole situation with their radar station. They had cleared out every flight in the area so it doesn't crash into the soon-to-be crashing space plane. As the space plane was now slowly heading towards the heart of Metropolis, and Major Tomlinson still can't gain control of the stupid space plane, they were looking on their radar screen when all of a sudden one of the men who was looking at the radar screen calls his superior over and he's like, Sir, you might want to look at this." He's like, "What is it, Jonas?" The young man says, "Look at this, sir. Look what's on the radar. There's something else coming in very fast on the radar, heading towards a space plane." His boss was like, "I thought we cleared out the whole area." "We did, sir. This is way too small for a normal aircraft, and it's coming in very fast towards the space plane." Meanwhile, in the cockpit of the Lexstar shuttle, as the people were panicking in there trying to in vain to gain control of the stupid space shuttle, suddenly they were looking out the window and they could see some figure and red and blue coming towards them at high speeds. Lois sees it too, and she's like, "Are we hallucinating?" Major Tomlinson says, "I don't think so, because all of us are seeing the same thing. It's a flying man headed towards us." Lois is like, "Okay, I'm gonna take that we're all hallucinating the same thing here." Soon Superman flies past them. He gets to the rear end of the space plane, and he uses his X-ray vision to look around, and he sees the wiring that connects the power and control circuits to the main engine. Superman pulls out the flap that covers it, and he uses his heat vision to destroy the wires. Soon the main engine cuts out, and Superman flies to the front of the plane. He goes underneath the nose, and he takes control by lifting the plane up and flies the experimental shuttle safely to the Metropolis International Airport and lands it gently on the tarmac. He opens the main doors and he comes in, and he goes to the cockpit to see if the people were alright. They were shocked. Major Tomlinson asks, "Who are you?" Superman says, "I'm a friend and I'm here to help everybody. You can call me," then he paused for a long moment, "Superman." And he says, "I hope this does not put you off flying. It's still statistically the safest way to travel." He waves goodbye to everybody and leaves out through the door and flies off. Lois quickly runs after him, and she sees him taking off flying. She was shocked and awed that she passed out and slid down the emergency inflatable slide. Later, Lois Lane, after hours of fighting to get back to the Daily Planet, got back to the Daily Planet and got into Perry's White office. And she says, "Mr. White, you won't believe what happened." Perry White says, "I understand what happened, Lois. Clark told me the whole thing. He even got the story." She's like, "What? Who got the story? What's his name?" Clark walks up and is like, "Hi, my name is Clark Kent. I'm trying to get a job here as a reporter, and I sort of..." But before Clark could finish, Lois interrupts him. "Hey, wait a minute," she says. "I know you. You're that guy that ran into me when I was headed for the elevator earlier." Clark's like, "Yes, you are. I recognize you now myself. I'm still sorry about that whole incident." Lois says, "Be quiet. I can't believe it. You're saying that this man outscooped me, Mr. White?" Perry says, "Outscoop you, Lois. He even got the name of the guy and got a brief interview with the super fella before he flew off." Lois is like, "No way. It can't be. It can't be." Then Clark asks Perry White, "So, Mr. White, do I have the job?" Perry White says, "Clark, you're on the payroll for hours." Clark lets out a smile. Soon, the moment was interrupted when someone from the copy room comes in, showing the headlines for tomorrow's paper. It read, "Caped Wonder Stunned City, story by Clark Kent." Clark lets out a big smile. Lois looks at him and she says, "Okay, Kent, okay, I see how it is. You're a very sneaky and resourceful fella, but don't worry, no one outscoops Lois Lane twice. Just remember that, Clark. No one outscoops me twice." And she walks out of the office. Jimmy's like, "Don't worry about her. She's just highly competitive. She'll warm up to you eventually," said Jimmy. Clark's like, "Well, I really hope so." And he lets out a big smile. Like and subscribe. The end.